Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm excited to bring you this video today on Psalm 23. This is a really beautiful psalm, and it's actually one of the most famous psalms in the Bible, I believe. Possibly one of the most famous passages in the Bible. Lately, I've spent some time studying this psalm. Several times I've heard the Holy Spirit tell me to spend time with this passage, and I've actually heard from other people that they've also been told to spend time with this psalm lately. So I believe it's really relevant to the times that we're living in and then the times that we're approaching. So I encourage you to take a moment and spend some time studying it with me. So to begin, I'm going to go through and read the psalm, and then we'll break down some of the references and some other passages from the Bible that relate to it. So Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So this is a really beautiful psalm, and it speaks not only of our ability to depend on Lord to provide for us, but also his promises of eternal life. In this passage, the Lord compares himself to a shepherd, and what immediately comes to mind is Jesus, who calls himself the Good Shepherd. In John 10:11 through 18, Jesus says, I am the Good Shepherd. The Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my own, and my own know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So in this passage, Jesus is comparing himself to the shepherd who spends his time looking after his sheep. He basically says that only the one who owns the sheep will be responsible enough and have the most love for them and care for them, that he will lay down his life even for the sheep. Before King David was chosen by the Lord to be king of Israel, he was a shepherd. And if you turn to 1 Samuel 17, we see the story where David is going up against Goliath. At the time David was a young boy, his brothers were fighting in the war against the Philistines. David is sent by his father to bring a package down to the front line to bring some food that his father sends to his brothers who are in the war. And when David arrives, Goliath, the champion of the Philistines, is standing in front of Israel's army, taunting them. And he's walking back and forth, taunting them, saying, who will challenge me? There's this hilarious exchange between David and his brothers, and he's like, why are you guys letting this guy taunt you? Like, who is this guy? I can fight this guy in no problem. Eventually, Saul, the current king of Israel, hears that David is all riled up and ready to fight this huge giant, and Saul brings him into his tent. Then Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him, and I attacked him, and I rescued it from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and may the Lord be with you. So this is an amazing passage telling of the bravery of this young boy. It's really interesting to think, we think of a shepherd, we think of some meek and mild little boy who walks along with the sheep and spends all his time daydreaming and looking at the clouds. But in reality, shepherds were pretty burly young men. They were expected to be willing to fight wild animals to protect their flock. So I think this is the image that Jesus compares himself to, not to the meek and mild shepherd, but to the strong and brave and ferocious shepherd who is willing to fight wild animals on the sheep's behalf. So I think this is a really awesome comparison that the Lord makes. So if we go back to Psalm 23, let's just go through line by line. Psalm 23, verses 1, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." So the very most important thing about this line is a promise. It says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Want implies any type of want. To say that I will not want implies that everything will be taken care of. Not only food and rest and protection, but also spiritual rest, spiritual sustenance, spiritual protection. There's a really amazing passage also in the book of Isaiah that's actually a prophecy of Jesus. Isaiah 40, verse 11. "Like a shepherd, he will tend his flock. In his arms he will gather the lambs and carry them in his bosom. He will gently lead the nursing ewes." So there's not only a ferocious aspect to the shepherd who's willing to lay down his life, but there's also a tender aspect to the shepherd. And I think this is a really beautiful verse of Jesus showing how he carries us in times of trouble. He carries us and takes care of us. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." There is something also about being willing to subjugate yourself, to humble yourself, to let the Lord lead you. Oftentimes we have the desire to lean on our own understanding, that our ways are wise, that we know what we're doing, that we know how to take care of ourselves. But there's something about relying on the Lord as your shepherd it requires a bit of humbleness. So to call the Lord your shepherd and to be willing to be his sheep, to be willing to be guided, there's definitely a reward in that. If you rely on the Lord, he will take care of you. So there's this implication that you have to relinquish control. In Psalm 78, verse 52, it says, "But he led forth his own people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. He led them safely so that they did not fear, but the sea engulfed their enemies." So not only is there a tender relationship between the shepherd and his individual sheep, but there's also this feeling of a group identity, of being part of the flock, of being part of the herd of sheep. It's a reference to the church, to the body of Christ, to being part of the group, one of many. So the next verse in Psalm 23, "He makes me lie down in green pastures." So there's a reference to ease and comfort, to being encouraged to lie down, to not always be forced to work or labor, but to be encouraged by the shepherd to lie down, to rest, to find comfort in a verdant green pasture where it's an abundant source of food and nourishment. So the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. So the sheep does not work. It has value in just being. It's valuable to the shepherd just in the essence of its being. The sheep is being guided, it's being taken care of. And the Lord promises to take care of us. He says, "My yoke is easy and my burden light." In Matthew 11:28 through 30, it says, "Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So it's a really beautiful promise of the ease and the gentleness and the extreme care that the shepherd gives towards its flock. "He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul." There's also a promise that Jesus makes that he will always come searching for it. There is this picture that's painted of the shepherd carrying after a flock of sheep. One sheep goes astray, and the shepherd spends time looking for the lost sheep. In Matthew 18, verse 12 through 13, there's a parable that Jesus tells, and he says, "What do you think? If any man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray, does he not leave the 99 on the mountains and go and search for the one that is straying? If it turns out that he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over the 99 which have not gone astray. So it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that any of these little ones perish." So Jesus points out that even though we have a tendency to go astray, even though we have a tendency to stray from the flock, it's his great joy to go searching for us, to find us, and to go after us, and his great joy in finding us. One sheep is worth the whole. He delights in finding the one sheep that's gone astray. So it's this promise of the Lord's faithfulness. He will always come after us. He'll always accept us back into his flock. In Isaiah chapter 53, verse 6, it says, "All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living, for the transgression of my people to whom the stroke was due." Isaiah chapter 53 is a prophecy about Jesus, and within this prophecy is a promise of the fact that of the Lord's faithfulness, the fact of the Lord's faithfulness. And it even in this passage compares us to sheep who sometimes go astray, and the fact that he always searches after us, and that he laid down his life for us. So it's a beautiful promise and passage about Jesus and the foretelling of the sacrifice that he would make on our behalf. So from the top of Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." This analogy of being guided down a path of righteousness is a symbol used in Proverbs that shows being led down a path of wisdom and discernment. It's the well-lit path. So in Proverbs 4:18, "But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn that shines brighter and brighter until the full day. The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know over what they stumble." So in Proverbs chapter 2, this whole passage is about seeking for discernment, seeking for wisdom, and there's a promise in this. There's a promise also in this. If you go after wisdom, if you seek after it, the Lord promises that he'll guard your path. So he says in verse 10, "For wisdom will enter your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will guard you, understanding will watch over you, to deliver you from the way of evil, from the man who speaks perverse things, from those who leave the paths of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness." So in both of those passages from Proverbs, there's a comparison of the path in the light and the path in the dark. And this in Psalm 23, he says, "He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake." So there's a promise that if we follow after Jesus, if we let him be our shepherd, that he'll lead us in paths of wisdom. He won't lead us into paths of darkness. And in the next verse of Psalm 23, it says, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me." The original Hebrew for shadow of death is actually salmawet. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but it basically is more literally translated into the darkest shadows. But mawet, the end the last two syllables of that Hebrew word, Mawet, mean death. So it makes sense why the translators would call this the valley of the shadow of death. But the more literal translation would be the valley of darkest shadows. So if we go back to this analogy of the sheep being guided by the shepherd, you can imagine the fear, the feeling that it would be of a small sheep being guided through a dark valley. If you're in a dark valley, the sides are raised up on both sides of you. There's many places for the enemy to hide. There are many places for predators to hide. If you're being guided in a well-lit path, you can fully see the potential dangers around you. But if you're in the shadows, if you're being led through the shadows, you're not going to be able to see that. But in Psalm 23, there's an implication that even if you are walking through the valley of shadows, there's no need to fear evil because the Lord is with us. So it says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. And he says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. When I was studying Psalm 23 to give this message, I couldn't help but think of this famous passage from Isaiah that people love to quote. Isaiah 54:17, no weapon that is formed against you will prosper, and every tongue that accuses you in judgment will condemn. This is the heritage of the servants of the Lord, and their vindication is from me, declares the Lord. So, no weapon against you will prosper. I think this is something, as we approach the end times, I think this is something that we'll really need to learn how to lean on, this promise of the Lord saying that no weapon formed against us will prosper. And I think this is also something that's a reminder in Psalm 23. It's a comfort. It's telling us to be comforted by his protection. It says, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So the shepherd carries a rod and a staff. The staff is a specially shaped instrument that the shepherd uses to control his flock. It has, I'm sure you're familiar with the shepherd's hook. It's also the famous shape used for candy canes. It's why we give out candy canes at Christmas, because they're shaped like a shepherd's staff. The staff is used to control the flock. The round part of the staff can be hooked around the sheep's neck to guide them. They can also use the staff. They can turn the hook to press against the body of the sheep. They can also use the staff to sort of guide the sheep as they're walking. But the rod is a symbol of authority. The rod's a symbol of protection and dominion, authority. A rod is something that a king it's very similar to the scepter that a king holds. So we're guided we're guided by the staff, and we're also protected by the rod. So like King David protecting his sheep from the lion and the bear, he fights hand-to-hand combat with the enemy on his sheep's behalf. So I think this is something that the Lord is telling us, that we need to learn to listen to him, to lean on his protection, on his guidance, on his ability to protect us from evil. I think something else that's really interesting, it says in Psalm 23, it says, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The sheep is walking along, it's facing forward, it's walking in the direction that the shepherd is guiding it. But the sheep might not always be able to see the shepherd, but we can feel his staff, we can feel him guiding us, we can feel his protection. Just knowing if the sheep is walking through darkness, the shepherd might not always be visible, but we can know that he's there because we sense his protection. We sense his staff leading us, guiding us, gently pressing against our sides, gently telling us which direction to go. And then we know that the shepherd is also there to protect us. Even though we don't feel the rod, we know it's there. We know it's there to protect us. Psalm 23, verse 5, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil, my cup overflows. When I read this verse, I can't help but think about the Israelites in Exodus wandering through the desert, and God constantly provides for them. If you go to Exodus in chapter 15, so the Israelites have been led out of Egypt. They're in the desert, they're wandering through the desert, and Moses is trying to hear from the Lord, trying to hear how to take care of all of these people. The Israelites are constantly worrying about where their food is going to come from, how they're going to be provided for. And it's this constant battle of trying to learn, Moses is constantly trying to guide the Israelites to depend on the Lord, to look to the Lord for provision. So in chapter 15, it starts, the Lord provides water, the Lord provides manna from heaven, the Lord provides meat and water from the rock. So even though they're in the desert, the Lord is constantly providing for them. Guided out of Egypt, they have escaped their enemies, and the Lord is constantly providing for them. You can't help but think that the Egyptians probably thought that the Israelites would die wandering through the desert by themselves, but God constantly provides for them. So, as we approach the end times, throughout the book of Revelation, there's references to famine, there's references to great inflation. It says that a day's wages will barely be able to feed a man, not to mention the rest of his family. So I think we're really going to have to learn how to depend on the Lord for sustenance, to depend on the Lord for provision. This is something, some people try to lay up stores of food, and I just don't think that's the answer. I don't think the times are going to be, I don't think it's going to be sustainable for us to save food, to put aside food for, I don't think it's going to be sustainable or practical for most of us to put aside food for that entire 7-year tribulation. Ask the Lord what you should do. Ask him for wisdom, for guidance, and how to take care of yourself and your family. But I think there is going to be, it's going to require a lot of faith. It's going to require us to look to God for help. And whether or not you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, it kind of doesn't matter, because if you're a Christian and you're here during the tribulation, whether or not you get saved before or after the rapture, it's really beside the point. For anyone on earth who is alive during that time, because of great famines, because of war, because of inflation, I think it's really going to be required that we depend on the Lord for help, for provision. So I think the book of Exodus and the Israelites passage through the desert, looking to the Lord to prepare a table before them in the presence of their enemies. I think that's something that is a perfect symbol of the days we have ahead of us. And then it says, "You have anointed my head with oil." So this is something I found really interesting. I've heard recently that a shepherd anoints the head of the sheep to protect it from insects. The oil goes all over the sheep's ears and eyes. It protects the sheep from getting insects and from being infested with insects around its face. It's for the comfort of the sheep. It also can help the sheep be protected from briars, from getting caught in briars and branches. And it's just a sweet analogy that the Lord uses to show how much he cares for us, how much he takes care of us in every detail. It's for the comfort of the sheep. And then it says, "My cup overflows." So in this verse, I can't help but thinking of Luke 6:38. "Give and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return." So he says, it will be a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. When you're making something, when you're baking, you can imagine this cup. It's like you're trying to measure the right amount. It's pressed down, it's shaken, it's compacted, but it's still overflowing. That's the abundance of the Lord that's promised to us. So our cup overflows because he's so good to us. So it's not just that we'll have our basic needs provided, it's that he takes care of us in abundance, to the point of abundance. And then finally, the last verse, surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So this verse, all of these other verses, we are learned to lean on the Lord for protection, for guidance, for wisdom, for protection from evil, to guide us in our paths, to guide us in the direction that we go, to guide us, to provide for us food, to provide for us in every aspect of our lives. But then beyond that, he provides not only all of those things, but also there's this promise of goodness and loving kindness. He guides us in goodness and loving kindness. He's so generous in his love for us, and he loves us so deeply that not only does he desire to give us all of these things, to take care of us, but to show us goodness and loving kindness. And then there's the hope of eternity, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So we have this hope of eternity, and I think that's something that we have this hope of eternity, and that's something that not many people have. I think as Christians, we can sometimes forget that or take for granted the fact that we know where we're going when we die. We know where we're going to end up. Not many people in the world can say that. They don't really know what lies beyond death, but we do. We have the blessed hope of eternity with the Lord, and that's something that we all look forward to. I'm very grateful for my life. I'm grateful for the things the Lord has given me. I'm grateful for the things that have been provided for me, the degree to which he's let me pursue my passions and my dreams as an artist. But ultimately, my main desire is to be with him. I think about him every day. He's really all I want. I think about that verse or that psalm, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul pants for you. So that's really how I feel about the Lord. And I hope you'll spend some time studying this psalm, Psalm 23. It's really such a beautiful psalm, and it really provides so many blessings and assurances, so many things that we can count on in times that are hard. It's a psalm that you can carry around no matter what type of day you're having. But I think it's also something that we really need to internalize, and I really encourage you to memorize this psalm. It's really not that long. It's only 6 verses. I think anyone can memorize this. I think it's just such a beautiful psalm to have with you and to be able to carry with you, not only in your day-to-day life, but also in the end times, which I really believe we're quickly approaching. So I really encourage you to spend some time with the psalm and spend some time really getting it deep down in your heart. So to close, I'm just going to read it through one more time, and I invite you to close your eyes and just really let the words soak down into your soul. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and loving kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So I hope you're blessed by this message. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me again. This is one of my first videos, and I hope to be making more videos like this. So have a great day. Love you. Bye.